Hello, my name is Carl Hughes. Today we're going to talk about the safe operation of a portable circular saw. Okay, so before we get into the actual operation of a portable circular saw, let's just take a look at some of the features that are found on most portable circular saws. Number one, and very common, is a spring-loaded guard, which you see right here. Okay, as we push the saw through the material, you're going to see that this guard will rise up, and it's spring-loaded so it returns down when we are finished the cut. This is very important for our own safety. Next of all, you'll notice that the teeth of the blade actually point up. That is because the rotation of the blade is in this direction. The saws actually cut upwards. And so that is a safety feature also. The saw cuts in a direction that is opposite to the way that we would feed the material. If it went in the same direction, the saw would actually pull us, and that would be unsafe. So we don't want to do that. So the saw does cut against us. Now, right over here, if we were to do a bevel cut, we have a guide that will allow us to set the base plate of the saw to different angles, depending if we needed to do a bevel cut. For example, cutting a door or cutting a rafter. Okay, sometimes hip rafters will require a different cut, and that's what this is for. In addition, if we were trying to make certain joinery, we could use this as well. Okay, so this is our depth gauge, this is our spring-loaded guard, and this is our angle gauge, okay? And all of these are adjustable. In addition, this saw is a worm drive saw, which means there's a very, very big gear involved in the motor. Right along here, you see this big housing, and that means there's a gear in there that's going to make this a very strong saw. Because of that, most worm drive saws have their blade that will cut to the right of your marks whenever you cut. So it's important to keep in mind this is really a right-handed saw. In other words, you would maneuver it with your right hand and you can see the blade clearly as the blade will be to the right of the cut. Okay? So it's a very important feature. There are three things we should remember. First of all, we should remember to set up the saw properly. Second of all, we should utilize a ground fault circuit interrupter. And lastly, but not least, we should be always wearing safety glasses when we operate a tool like this. So before we ever plug in a circular saw, we should set it up correctly. And what we're going to do is set it for depth, and if we so desire or if we need to, we would set the angle of the base plate. In this case, we're going to make a straight cut, which is very, very common. So we'll assume that our angle cut is going to be set for 0 or a 90-degree cut, meaning that our saw blade is at a 90-degree angle to the base plate, which would give us a square cut. The next thing we need to do, of course, is to set up the depth of the blade. So we would like to adjust the depth of the cut. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to adjust the base plate of the circular saw, and that's controlled by this clamp here. And once this clamp is released, the base plate will slide up and down freely. So let's just show you. I release the clamp, and as you notice, the weight of the saw will adjust the base plate up or down. And as I do that, we're going to adjust for the actual depth of the cut. It is very, very important to do this before you plug the saw in, because in the event that you put your finger on the trigger, you could start the saw accidentally. So what I like to do, with the saw unplugged, draw back the guide, release the clamp that holds the base plate, adjust the saw up or down to the desired depth, clamp back the base plate, and then of course we can release the guard and the saw is ready for operation. And what we want to do is set the blade so that it is just a little bit deeper than the material we're going to cut. And if you look at right here, this is just a little bit deeper than the 2x3 that I want to cut. So if we're going to do that, that should be about a 1/4 inch deeper than the total thickness of the material. That's a safe dimension. Now, if I were to cut, for example, a piece of plywood, then maybe this would be a little bit too deep. And so I would readjust the base plate for 3/4 plywood to just a 1 inch cut instead of an 1 3/4 inch cut. Now, this particular model circular saw uses an extension cord into the back of the saw right here. And we're going to plug that in now, and then we're going to plug it into the GFCI. So I'll just grab my extension cord right here, and we're going to plug it into the back of the saw. And we're now ready to plug the circular saw to the power source. The location for the GFCI is best placed between the power saw cord and the extension cord. So we're going to plug the GFCI into the cord for the saw. We'll plug the saw into the GFCI, and then we're going to plug the GFCI into the extension cord. So now that we have the cord from the circular saw plugged into one end of the GFCI and the GFCI connected to our power source, we can test it out. This is the trip button to test it, and this is the reset button. So we'll press the test button, and you notice that it popped. To reset it, we're going to press the reset button. This means that our ground fault circuit interrupter is working and will provide us a level of protection. The advantage of this device is that it will trip at 5 milliamps, which is 1/1000th of 1 amp per milliamp. So the 5,000th milliamps is really a very small amount of electric current, which will trip the breaker in this device much more quickly than if we had to wait for a 15 amp breaker to trip. Finally, before we actually operate a circular saw, we do need to put on our safety glasses. And the safety glasses are essential with this type of a saw because the saw cuts in an upward direction, which would throw the dirt and chips towards the operator's eyes. So now that we have our safety glasses on, it's time to grip the saw and get it ready to work. In this case, it's a worm drive saw. I'm going to use my right hand at the drive end of the saw and my left hand on the top guide. So you can see from this position that my right hand is guiding from the back of the saw and my left hand is at the top of the saw helping to steady it. This will make for a safe cut, and both my hands are behind the blade. Now, a good way to start a cut, back it away from the wood just a little bit. When we turn on the saw, we're going to allow it to get up to full speed before we actually cut. So we're going to do that now. So when we finish the cut, it is very important to wait for the saw blade to stop turning before we place it down. That's for 2 reasons. Number one, we want to make sure that we don't entangle something, but in addition, we don't want the blade to damage the guard. The guard is very important, and so we want to take good care of our tools for future use. So it's very important to allow the saw to stop, and then we put it down. Now, just to review, let's think about what we talked about. Before we cut anything, we should put the saw in, set it up so that we can cut what we need to. Number 2, we're always going to use a ground fault circuit interrupter because that's going to protect us as the operator. And number 3, of course, we're always going to wear our safety glasses whenever we operate a circular saw for the reasons we talked about before. We hope that you operate your circular saw in a safe fashion and develop good habits that will serve you for many years to come.